So we got another story, and everyone that is a fan of Tulsi Gabbard, I'm sure you're happy. We haven't done a story on her in like a few days, so we're back with a story with Tulsi Gabbard. In the midst of everything that has been happening with Warren and Bernie, what has been lost in the process is that another woman running for president has reiterated basically what Bernie Sanders said he has said to Warren, and that is Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard has come to the defense of Senator Bernie Sanders in his war of words with fellow Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren. Gabbard, a Hawaii Democrat, shared a personal anecdote about a meeting she had with Sanders before declaring her own 2020 candidacy, saying the Democratic socialism from Vermont was nothing but supportive. I just realized that they literally just... Anyway, everyone always has to make sure they throw in that socialism. And I literally just got caught. I'm like, whoa, I just read that. Right. Okay.
Socialism.
Socialism. Bad. We had a nice one-on-one conversation, and I informed him that I would be running for president. Gabbard tweeted Monday. In that meeting, he showed me the greatest respect and encouragement, just as he always has, going on to say that this is Bernie Sanders. It is ludicrous to believe at the same meeting where Warren told me she was going to run for president, I would tell her a woman couldn't win, Sanders said to CNN after the report was publicized, report being in giant quotations. But, you know, it's just good to see that Tulsi is, again, standing in support of Bernie Sanders. It's very much is like what happened with 2016. Tulsi, again, there's no one with a stronger backbone than Tulsi. Tulsi will do what she thinks is the right call, regardless of how it plays out politically, and so far, it's kept her in very turbulent waters, but she has maintained heading and speed where she's looking to go. And it's just nice to see that she's backing Sanders on this and not like kind of fading in the corner and letting him have it.
I remember, a year and a half ago when people were saying, hey, who do you like in the Democratic primary? And, I'd mentioned, of course, Bernie Sanders. I'd mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. And more often than not, the very first comment people would say when I said Tulsi Gabbard, they go, oh, well, she has no chance. Well, here we are. And, Kamala Harris is out. If I had said Kamala Harris, nobody a year and a half ago was going to say, oh, she doesn't have a chance. Nobody, if I said Julian Castro, nobody would be like, oh, he doesn't have a chance.
And to be fair, like originally when it's sort of like the one thing that I did not get right was I thought Kamala was going to be the end with Bernie. I thought it was going to be her and Bernie. I was completely wrong.
Yeah, her record really caught up to her. So I think there is some worth admitting that Tulsi is not in a particularly good spot, right, as far as the Democratic primary is concerned. There was some merit to her boycotting the 6th debate, but she did not even make the cut in the 7th debate, so it wasn't really boycotting it anymore. And while there's some strategy to that, and while it draws some attention to how she has been unfairly treated throughout the entire campaign, it doesn't actually do anything to get her poll numbers up. And I think we've seen that. I think she's kind of stagnated in the polls a little bit. So in the wake of the 7th debate, though, and the spat between Warren and Sanders, I think we are starting to see a little bit. So we're seeing people jump ship from Warren, and a lot of them are going to Bernie, which is nice to see. But also, there's been a little bit of a rekindling of the Bernie-Tulsi, commentary. Maybe he'll choose Tulsi as a running mate. Maybe he'll choose Tulsi for Secretary of State, something we've been saying would be an excellent fit for Tulsi for a while. But I think it's rekindled some of that because I think there's a lot of consternation around, oh, what is Elizabeth Warren doing and why is she being so disingenuous? And that's a really bad look for her. And Tulsi has come away more or less unscathed. The downside is by not being on the debate stage, she has just inherently lower profile. Yeah. She's not getting her message out as much, and you're going to see her poll numbers stagnate as a result.
Now, I think another thing that's nice about, like, we were saying this when the debate was happening, when at the very beginning, we're like, oh, they're doing a decent amount of foreign policy stuff. We really miss Tulsi because, and you called it right before it started, you're like, look, without Tulsi on stage, Buttigieg is now going to be able to flex his veteran muscle, even though he was basically an engineer overseas and didn't really ever see combat.
But Bernie's going to win the ideological conversation, right?
Yeah.
Bernie wins on foreign policy.
Yeah, but
when Tulsi's not on stage.
But Tulsi wasn't there to hit back on anyone the way she does. She wasn't there to really drive home her foreign policy message, which, again, Bernie Sanders, if Tulsi's not there, Bernie Sanders has the best message. But when Tulsi's on stage, Tulsi has the better message. And it's what you're saying. Yeah, I think that this rekindles, I think for a lot of people that were like, oh, it's definitely going to be Warren, that it's, no, why won't it be Tulsi? Why not Bernie, Nina Turner? Nina Turner would be really great to have. She's so charismatic. If you haven't ever been to a Bernie Sanders rally, and she generally precedes him on every event, she's far more charismatic than Bernie Sanders is. She would be perfect for a organizer-in-chief and someone that he would trust. She
fires up the crowd insane. She just gets out there and is a cheerleader from the get-go. She just hits the ground running, and where she stands. You know that she's there to support the cause. She's there fighting for Bernie, and you know that Bernie's got her back too. You see those two together on stage, and it's just like, man, that's a ticket. I love that. I love that. There's a lot of push from the Bernie crowd to be like, hey. We want it to be Nina. We want it to be Nina. Make it Nina.
And it's so funny, like how many people, especially early on when it was just like the primary was brand new, and they were like, I remember I sat down with someone. I was at a dinner with them, and they were like, "Who do you think will be Bernie's VP?" I think if it was Bernie was president, I think Warren would be nice. And I'm like, I'm obviously with I don't like punching water. You know what I mean by that. I just like trying to be constructive. And I was like, I think it would make sense to be Nina Turner. It would be a good pick for Sanders. And they're like, I've never heard of her. And I'm like,
oh, you will.
You will. If you're at a Bernie rally, you'll definitely hear from her. We've interviewed her once. We would love to get her back on the show at some point. She's just a wonderful person to talk to.
I wouldn't recommend people going and seeking out that interview. We had some audio issues that time. It was a couple years ago. It's better now. We have microphones.
Yeah, you get to see, if you look at our thing, you're like, oh, wow. They really did only start with a phone camera at some point.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's true. But no, I'm happy. Tulsi Gabbard's there. She's still around, and she has such value. I can't wait to see where she goes. I think that's a good place to end that. Mm-hmm. So, okay. Now we get to talk about the other end of the CNN attacks on Bernie Sanders. Well, let's just talk about that. So, this is something that it never even came in mind that this would be a possibility that would happen. That is, other mainstream media are actually calling out CNN for what they did to Bernie Sanders and with Elizabeth Warren.
It was a bridge too far.
It was a bridge too far. It was like the CNN was like, all subtlety was out the window. They were like, we don't care about that. We're just going to do everything. So I'm going to read a little bit from this article from The Nation. Yes, The Nation had an issue with CNN. A lot of places did. And again, it was very odd. I was just looking up clips earlier today, and I saw a Tucker Carlson video, and I'm like, I have to agree with this guy and his take. It's basically, it's such weird bedfellows get created in these situations. Anyway, Tuesday night's Democratic primary debate was likely to redound to Elizabeth Warren's benefit, and I had to look that up, and they're basically it's just going to benefit her. That was the expectation. We talked about that earlier in story one, how this very much seemed like the moment where everyone's going to gather in a room and just try and shank Sanders in some way, shape, or form, and it backfired. So the biggest loser of that night, and this again is The Nation, was the network that hosted the event. CNN was so consistently aligned against Bernie Sanders. This is The Nation telling us this, that it compromised its claim to journalistic neutrality, finally seeing something that we have been saying and speaking about for over a year. The issue, to take the issue of the argument between Sanders and Warren. Sanders flatly denied that he told Warren that a woman could not win the presidency. Since Sanders and Warren were the only two people present in the conversation, there was no way to know who is giving an accurate account of it. And again, CNN had based all of this on like anonymous sources who had talked to anonymous sources who overheard anonymous sources talk about them talking to overhearing Bernie Sanders in the other room next to them, or something that Warren had said. It's like a giant game of telephone. Chain of custody, people. Anyway, so where was I? The exchange with the CNN moderator, Abby Phillip, went like this. Phillip, you're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election, Bernie Sanders. That is correct. going to Senator Warren. Senator Warren, what do you think when Sanders told you that a woman could not win re-election? I disagreed. The audience laughed. We laughed. We were like, what are they doing? Like, Bernie Sanders laughed. Everyone saw this as the joke that it was.
Yeah, that's journalistic standards out the window.
Yes. It was like, it was so crazy. The nation is writing that this was crazy.
Gaslighting in real time.
Yes.
Just like, hey, that thing that you just heard was the opposite. It was the opposite of what you just heard. Let's go with the opposite reality now. Opposite reality, go.
Yeah. Anyway, so earlier that evening, CNN host Wolf Blitzer was similarly one-sided in asking questions about foreign policy. As Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo noted, podcaster Katie Halper was also unimpressed with how CNN commentators, they're literally oh my God, they're quoting Katie Halper. That's wonderful. When do you see these things? We're living in interesting times, people.
Indeed.
She tweeted, these CNN commentators are appalling. They're making it sound like Sanders created a false controversy over foreign policy differences between him and Biden as if they're not actual exist. Right, that's the other thing we didn't cover. That Biden did take a hit early in the debate with Sanders, but it just got completely overshadowed by this handshake gate. Distinction between two of them, and then the economic questions were similarly ideological. Taking God, this actually is not spelled correctly. Talking points, right-wing talking points. Okay, sorry I couldn't say that all in one sentence cleanly. By the end of the event, there was a great deal of anger bubbling from Bernie Sanders supporters annoyed at CNN. We had CNN is trash, #1 trending on Twitter. Also next to it, Elizabeth the Snake or Warren the Snake or something of that. Lots of snakes on social media. It's just I don't use Twitter that often, but I could tell there were a lot of snakes on this damn Twitter. I'm not sure if that translated well, but the point I'm trying to make is that this event by CNN, they were doing everything in their power, and they just overextended in the worst way. It's like I was saying yesterday. It's like if you're playing a game of D&D, they just kept rolling ones over and over and over again. Improbable? Maybe, but they did it anyway. CNN, you had Warren. They had like what they thought was, they legitimately thought, CNN thought this, Warren's campaign thought this, I'm sure if Biden was involved in this, he thought this as well, that this was a slam dunk. They're going to once and for all, Bernie Sanders is leading in the polls, we're going to take him out. How are we going to do that? We're going to make everyone think he's sexist. And instead, Warren's hemorrhaging support. Her people that were supported her are demanding their donations back. Bernie took in more donations in a 24-hour period than he ever has before, from 25,000 new people. CNN is a joke. You have other mainstream media outlets calling CNN a joke. This couldn't have backfired more. This was the moment. This is the last debate when they were like, we're going to take out Sanders. And they've propped him up. They've hurt Warren. They've hurt CNN. Now when CNN says anything about Bernie Sanders, everyone's going to call back on this. It's going to be exactly like what Donald Trump is going to be able to do with Russiagate anytime anyone brings it up.
So, you know what's weird is this playbook that CNN is using might have worked 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? But in the age of the internet, in the age of mass communication and Twitter and YouTube and independent journalism, it's not going to work. So what ends up happening is, let me put this down here. So they start with, oh no, Trump is saying, CNN fake news, and we have to have, a fourth estate in this country. We have to have a journalistic outlet that can tell the truth. And, something about apples and bananas, CNN, we're trying to tell the truth. And so they get to build themselves up as like, we're these truth tellers, and the president, he's trying to usurp democracy, and he's trying to destroy everything by saying, don't believe the news. And then they turn around and go, okay, now everyone's got to believe us. We've got a monopoly on the truth. Let's tell everyone that Bernie's a sexist and couch it in this very thin veneer of rationalism and, a bunch of unnamed sources said this in a room, and you said this, Bernie, why did you say this? I didn't say that. When he said this, Elizabeth, what did you think? This kind of just gaslight people and use these manipulation tactics to just get people to have cognitive dissonance and go, I don't even know what's real anymore. And you wonder why people don't want to trust CNN or mainstream press. And you go, oh, but if you can't trust the press, who can you trust? We have to have something that is going to hold this administration in check. We need to be the standard bearers for truth. And it's like, well, why don't you stop lying then? If you want people to trust you, you have to not lie to their faces all the fucking time. Excuse me.